here. We talk about whatever you want.
Good. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of Roll Call. It's 8 a.m. Everybody knows, friend of the show, Josh Schiffer. Josh, welcome back.
Hey, it's great to see everybody. Thanks for having me on, man. It's been
Yeah,
a
it's
minute,
been
and I'm
it's
really
been
glad to be
a
here.
year. Yeah, it's been over a year since you've been on. I can't believe.
A couple of things have happened.
To say the least, yeah, in the true crime world, a couple of things have happened. I mean, wow, right? So let me get your when you first heard about the Kohberger plea deal, what was your first thought that came to your head? Because I wasn't ready for it.
It's not like a ready, not ready. It's that these cases, there's always that opportunity for surprise or shock, even when you know it's kind of the right thing that the system's trying to produce. So when there's a horrible crime, the system is set up to address it. And we've built things like police. And so if something bad happens, we get to call the police and they come out and they investigate. Hopefully they protect people in danger and hopefully they serve the people that have been victimized, and they're going to investigate the case. So that's what they do. And then we've got prosecutors who are built to investigate, analyze our rights, and prosecute people. Part of that prosecution is being mindful of the totality of circumstances involved in any one crime. And that's, I think, the perspective a lot of people lose when they get angry about the disposition that we saw yesterday in Kohberger and over the last couple of months. Because when you reverse roles with the state, what do you have? Okay, you've been elected to serve this community. And it's a community that's special because it's got the unique people in it, and it's got this unique institution in it. And educational institutions are so important. You've got this obligation to do justice, and a horrible thing happens. What is justice? And that question has no answer. It has a lot of stuff we all agree on, but then there's a bunch of parts we don't agree on. And the death penalty comes into that conversation. How and when pleas are made comes into that conversation. And that's when we really go to leadership and we trust them to make the calls that we don't know enough about to make, that it would be wrong for us as the big frothy mob to make that decision because we don't know the details. And I think a lot of those details, the obligations of the state to be a mindful steward for the community in its search for justice, those really played a big role in making an offer that Mr. Kohberger was very wise to accept, even though I get a lot of the anger and the frustration that's surrounding it.
Well said, because that is actually a pretty succinct, type of thinking, and a lot of times, now we see in the true crime world, right, we have this mob mentality and people get upset and they go right to Twitter or wherever and they
Oh,
start,
yeah.
it's pretty wild when you think about it. I always say, could you imagine if this social media was around when the OJ trial was happening?
It's so fascinating you bring that up. Think about social media during other big historical, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I and World War II. When you look at how the populace was or got to the point where they were like, yes, we need to join this fight, and for whatever reason, that's really the decision process that social media affects. And one of the scary, interesting, brilliant parts of social media is how quickly you can move these big, massive social needles one way or another. Typically, if you want to motivate them, you do that through fear. Fear is the fastest way to motivate people. And social media is this amazing electric outlet for fear. And can you just imagine, it was bad enough with the limited number of people that could read and get a newspaper. Imagine if we could have reached all of the angry, frothy people in a time that we have to judge historically. They're very different mindset with a lot of stuff. How would they have reacted to the idea of Japanese internment during World War II? How would the discussion of integration of our military forces how would that discussion would have looked?
Yeah.
Because obviously we're seeing the power of social media right now. Look at how it has affected the Reed case. Look at how it didn't have the effect in Kohberger that I think a lot of people would have liked. And look at how it just continues to drive the true crime and law enforcement narrative here in America. It's important stuff.
It's pretty wild when you see how fast this has grown. But the Kohberger case, I think, well, the Judge Hippler had talked about it. Basically, he was getting threats, right, about from his emails and everything else. So he kind of he made a big statement about that, and it was wild.
100%. And remember, judges didn't sign up for the social media express, especially any judge that's been on the bench for more than, say, 5-10 years. This is a new dawn and a new day for a lot of those judges, and we see different reactions with really good stuff coming up, but then some really awful things coming out of media. Now, I personally believe transparency rules. The evil in the world can't hide from light. And sure, light's going to expose everything, and that may not be what we want. There may be bad stuff exposed that is not perfect, but you got to have cameras in court. You got to have an active media in court. I think cameras in court should be the default. And you see judges now really coming back against social media and interacting with the media in specific ways. And the big question is, does it benefit justice? Does it benefit who does it benefit and who does it hurt? Does it hurt our fundamental due process claims like we see in Richard Allen, where the Richard Allen news this week was all about how he got transferred to a final prison where he's probably going to serve time. There are still massive questions that were brought up in the public sphere that the court has thoroughly and completely just decided they're not going to address. And the media has not been super successful in getting into that case. Whereas then you see Kohberger, I think the judge was presented with one of the most challenging, difficult cases in Hippler's career. A case that could be a discrete, reasonable amount of work, or it could have exploded into a amount of work and issues that are just unstoppable and would consume the judge's entire career. That's part of what you think about when you get into pleas, eliminating that need for appeals is a really huge benefit. And I think that the judges are figuring out how to deal with social media, but obviously it's putting a huge impact on how the state and defense choose to prosecute and defend cases. Reed may be studied for decades in how a independent or not independent third parties out in the social media sphere directly affected the prosecution and defense of a major-ish case.
All right. No, I mean, I agree 100%. It's not going anywhere. It's going to stay exactly where it is. It's only going to get even bigger as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you just hope that this is done in such a way where you can actually create a learning environment also.
Is that the purpose? So we tend to put morals in our systems because we'd like to be good. I believe that most people get up in the morning and existence is good. We are here to help each other and fulfill our obligations under a traditional American Judeo-Christian background of we try to do good stuff and bad stuff is bad. Is that what the system is designed to do, to decide what's good and bad? We get to the moral equivalencies and the moral obligations that politics in our system puts out, and those morals are shifting under us. And so we look at the system and we speak existentially about that. The system, its goals may change over time, and its goals can be really different depending on where you are within the system. When I was being raised, and Joe, I think it's the same way. Birthright citizenship was never a question. Now it is. Right. That came up in a legal context 2 weeks ago, right before my annual leave, in a way that was shocking to me. And the judge you watch the shivers. I was representing a naturalized U.S. citizen who had been here for over 20 years and is a very successful person. Family, business, good job. This crime didn't have anything to do with any of that stuff. This was a drinking related thing. Not the end of the world, something where, people make mistakes and they pay for them and you move on with life. Well, every time you enter a plea in the United States, you go through your Boykin rights, and it's the rights that everybody in criminal law knows. If you enter a plea, these are the rights you give up. You give up your First, Second, Third, Fourth, Fifth Amendment. Here's what those amendments mean. Do you understand that? And the client says, yes, for this plea, I understand giving up these rights. One of those cautions is, do you understand if you're not a citizen of the United States, your immigration status can be affected by taking this plea? Pretty standard. Wow. I asked yep, I'm a citizen. So the rest of this doesn't matter. No one can take away citizenship. Once you're a citizen, you're a citizen. And this was a particularly difficult case that had taken a long time, and we decided that we needed to dispose of it sooner rather than later, not because of, but it came into the conversation. My client, for the first time, I can't say no one's going to take away his citizenship.
Yeah, no, we're definitely living in some different times here.
Changes everything. Imagine you're in court and something that you think is minor suddenly has a punishment that could be really extreme. Yeah. Hey, you caused a minor car accident with no bad intent and damages, and you're paying for everything, and you got to pay the following two. Oh, hold on. You've now entered the state system, and this involves finances and and now we're going to, for the very first time, take something that was impossible to molest or change, your citizenship, and putting that on the table. If I've got to discuss that now in order to enter a plea for a speeding ticket, we're going to change the way that a vast number of people interact with our system. That creates inefficiencies. It creates a lack of stability and reliance. And that lack of stability and reliance is a big problem in our system that we're dealing with everywhere, not just in things like citizenship, but the whole law and order and justice community has to deal with the lack of consistency of justice. In Georgia, if you have 1 tiny gram of marijuana, you can go to jail for a year. Period. And it can be cause to revoke your probation or parole. And Sarge, like, you get a probation or parole revocation. That's the easiest home run for the judge ever. Hey, were you under this specific set of rules not to violate? Did you violate it? Great, yeah. Here's your punishment.
It's a no-brainer.
It's the easiest stuff judges do. Like, when you get to probation revocations, man, yeah. Judge has a lot of flexibility if there's been a new arrest or a new violation. And you're looking at really dispositive and disparate impacts where, for example, this is an issue that's happening all across America. Non-documented or documented elsewhere or semi-documented or in the middle of the process of documenting, but it's dealing with the federal government, so who knows what's happening, gets the otherwise minor reason to appear in court. It could be a speeding ticket, traffic ticket, insurance. It could be a code violation. It could be whatever it is. As soon as you interact with the state and are unable to provide immediate proof that you are a naturalized, certified resident, allowable, different jurisdictions are just going to pick you up. And they're picking you up and putting you into the immigration system, which is not transparent, and people are not being able to be found, certainly not able to go through their life. It changes the whole fundamental relationship with law and order. We have a huge population of people now who are going to say, I'm not going to go be responsible with this small thing, because being responsible with that small thing could lead to incredible circumstances from this other stuff on the side, such as, can I stay in America? And I got big problems with how this interacts, because now we end up, and Joe, I know you've seen this, crime victims will not call the police. The rise of organized crime You want to know why the mafia and some of these organized crime groups existed? Because those populations couldn't go to the cops. You were a poor ethnic immigrant in whatever big city, cops did not care about you. Now, your local mafia, Black Hand, organized group, that person, they can go get justice for you in your language. And we see now regularly, I didn't want to call the police because of immigration, because of these existential threats being the reason crimes escalate, crimes get worse, and crimes are underreported. It really breaks the entire system of what we think true crime is.
Yeah, no, it's and then they not only that, they don't come forward, but people then prey upon them because they know exactly what's going on. Just want to take a
yep. The scam. Sorry, you just hit on something that's been a particular. The scams, the money make, unbelievable these days. So here's what happens now, and I will warn everybody. Sorry, Justice Kitty just stood on the mouse. I was blown away by this, and I'd heard about it, and it just hadn't ever hit so right in my head. Client, family, complicated, brothers, sisters, kids, domestic violence, basic. Cops came, broke it up, brought a couple people to jail, easy peasy. Everybody bonds out, and then you start working on the case. Family's in jail. I'm talking them through how bonding works. You can use bonding companies. You can put up cash, da-da-da-da-da. Without telling me, they get some messages. Oh, come on, Kitty. You're really trying to keep the people from me. Without any warning, without talking to me, the client is reached out to by an automated phone system that then connects them to a deputy who says that there's some problems with the bond, and which we're talking about the bond. And hey, there's just a paperwork error. They're adding this little minor charge, but you need to send $1,000 or a couple $1,000 for additional bond.
Yeah, that easy.
Family goes, oh, absolutely. Texts me after, calls me. Hey, Josh, yeah, I just wanted you to know when you see that other charge, I already paid for that one. You did what? Yeah, no, when the deputy reached out on the phone and called me and I gave them money because, oh, Lord, but not everybody knows how prevalent these scammers are. Yeah. And law enforcement isn't doing, could do more to prevent some of these abuses. Sorry, I've been talking and talking.
That's okay. So I wanted a quick shout out to Shannon for that gift membership. Thank you very much, Shannon. Let's get into some of the documents that were released. And I want you to put your defense attorney hat on here for a second. During the interrogation, or right before the interrogation, I guess they read a Miranda. And Kohberger's talking to them. And then he says, I think I would need a lawyer.
Oh.
Is that an unequivocal request for an attorney at that point?
So this gets into a series of cases that I actually, over 20 years ago in law school, worked on a part of this issue. That's how big this issue is. A part of this issue.
Huge. This is huge.
As one of those, hey, everybody in the class is going to do this research project. This is how you all learn to be lawyers. And it is the issue of when and how you are implicating your right to counsel and exercising your right to counsel. And that overlays on the misbeliefs and of what people think Miranda and Fifth Amendment and how custodial interrogation and all that works. The Constitution doesn't have a convenient checklist for this is how procedure works. It's got a lot of guidance, and there's some big bright line rules. But every interaction between the state and a person is going to be unique. A lot of them are going to run together in how they generally look. So we've developed these guidelines to make sure your rights are enforced, but it requires factual investigation, which is exactly what we're talking about here with Kohberger. Once you raise your right to an attorney, while you are in some sort of custodial interrogation, your Fifth Amendment immediately applies. You get the benefits of well, this is where the state should have stopped. I believe the case is Davis versus State, and it's in the mid-90s, and it's from the U.S. Supreme Court. And there were a variety of rulings over the years of, well, as soon as the person says lawyer, is that when the cop have to stop? Are there magic words you have to say in order to raise your right to an attorney? Where are you in the custodial interrogation portion, or are you in a custodial interrogation? Because your right to counsel, it exists perpetually. It doesn't matter where you are. You have this amorphous right to counsel. How did you inform your interrogator or questioner or state agent that you are using that? And Kohberger saying something such as, I think I need a lawyer, I think I want to talk to a lawyer, has over the last 15 or 20 years been, well, that's not really an unequivocal, unambiguous invocation of your right to counsel, right to silence. And the courts have more recently gone towards a more formal interpretation, saying you really have to say, I want to talk to my attorney. I'm not going to answer questions until my attorney's present. And more clear, rather than the other rule, which is, hey, the moment they said anything about an attorney, you just have to stop questioning people. Because that was handcuffing too many officers and preventing them to do their job, because officers are defensive with their practice as well. We talk about defensive medicine, where doctors don't want to say something or want to take the most conservative route. Law enforcement's the same professionalism, or has the same professional obligations, where, hey, I don't want to step out of bounds. If he says something about lawyer, that's where I'm just going to stop questioning. And that's not necessarily their job. That could be too conservative for them. And that gray area gets really interesting. The good news with Kohberger was that it was so curated. They had done so much investigate. There wasn't going to be one of these, now we just bumped into him and had a conversation that may or may not have been, because no, it was all pretty clearly custodial interrogation. He was the suspect. There's none of this, oh, we didn't know, we were just doing an investigation. No. You knew exactly who you were going for and what you were going with. And thankfully, the Kohberger resolution, the totality of the circumstances, justified never having to deal with that issue, because he took a plea. And wrapping up loose ends like that, going back to your kind of the beginning of this conversation, that's part of the calculus a good prosecutor does in deciding how to dispose of cases. And while there's the upside in deciding those prosecutions as an elected prosecutor, that, hey, I've been empowered to make these important justice decisions. And in Kohberger, obviously, the prosecution was going to get one of the most severe remedies the community allows: a lifetime in prison, death penalty, the worst of the worst. What's the cost to get there? And part of the cost the DA has to think about is, well, we did have that wacky interrogation issue where he kind of invokes counsel. Because if it's a kind of invokes counsel, that's definitely something that can be appealed. If two rational people can sit down and spot the issue, odds are the court's going to spot it pretty easily. And if the state then relies on that evidence, makes it a big part of their case, that's going to be something the defense has an obligation to attack. We got rid of all that by taking a plea. And one of the other things we got rid of, and I think we'll probably talk about this some more, is how the death penalty interacts in this process. The death penalty is the biggest threat the state can really bring, but it also empowers the defense by saying, all right, if you're going to take this pathway, you all know this pathway just got wider, thicker, deeper, longer, far more challenging. Everything that was small is now huge. And when it gets huge, it's going to magnify other small things, which are going to become big. Avoiding that has a tremendous value for the community. And I believe the families are not being fully and completely honest about some of the fears of what happens when you go through trial, because the victims, and this is the right of the accused, this is your right as an accused person. The victims' lives in death penalty cases tend to get investigated as thoroughly as you can imagine. And I know that I don't want to spoil my child's memory with the involuntary, unintended, unplanned, otherwise never would have seen the light of day details of their personal life. Yeah, you're 19, 20-year-old. You do not want to see what they're texting about. I don't care how good a kid you think you have. Your kid ain't that good. And I'm not going to speculate as to how bad those conversations or what was it. I'm just telling you, a bunch of really popular young people. There was stuff in there that could be taken, twisted, presented to the world in a completely unfair way. We all avoid that. That's a huge win for the legacies of these victims and the families in preserving and keeping what the limited memories that they already have. And I think the state made a absolutely justifiable decision to get life without parole, waive these appellate issues. You ain't going to hear from Kohberger again for a long, long time, other than he's going to get married. 100% women are writing him. Left, right. Dude is married and here. Dude is going to have a full commissary forever. That you can be pissed off about that, but there's a 1% person or chance of the universe that just falls in love with people, and I ain't ever going to get it. But he's going to be married. He's going to try to do some media. I don't think the media universe is going to accept him super well. I think that kind of the marketplace for alleged perpetrator sourced media gets smaller since there's so many other ways of getting that information, and people don't want to reward people who have done admittedly horrible things.
Yeah, no. But I was just going through some of the things that one I wanted to definitely ask you about is, I think I would need a lawyer, right? I always said if it's not, I want a lawyer, well, then, you can continue to talk to him.
Totally reasonable.
Yeah.
Was it an unambiguous request? No.
Yeah.
All right, then it's not an unambiguous request.
Exactly. And what are the other things? And tell me if this would have been, like if you were representing him. When I read the police reports, I always get nuts. I mean, yeah, I kind of nitpick at certain things, but when the police officer, the first police officer is on the scene there, he's talking about lacerations and sharp injuries are not lacerations. Lacerations are made by blunt force trauma. And then people say, "Well, Joe, why are you making a big deal out?" It's a big deal.
Words matter, and man,
it's a big deal.
Amen, dude. Amen. Words matter, or they should matter, and you delegitimize your own speaking and writing when you use words incorrectly or loosely.
Right.
And yeah, sorry.
Because here's the issue, right? Because they were bringing up, alternative suspects, or more than one person was there doing this, because you have two victims that were talking about lacerations, because then the next report they write, he's talking about stab wounds, right? Which technically is the right term, but we prefer sharp force injuries because you don't know exactly what the weapon was. So you try to be generic and you just describe it as sharp force injuries.
Only be specific with stuff you absolutely know.
Right. And I'm saying this is not good. I'm not gonna say not good police work. It's not good report writing.
The police work could improve, and that's so important. And it's getting to something you and I think have discussed, is how defense works on officers, good and bad, is precisely what you're getting into. Officers are always going to get the benefit of the doubt that they're trying to do the right thing, and they're trying to do reports properly, and they're trying to use the correct, but their law enforcement, as my former police officer law partner says, law enforcement is concerned with enforcing. They're law enforcement. They're not law knowledgeable. They don't understand the incredibly complex, detailed relationship between the invocation of rights and no, that's not that officer's job. That officer's there to serve, protect, do frontline work. We cannot spend 10,000 years educating every cop and making them all into a constitutional law. No, we got to give officers the tools and the guidance and the training to do their jobs with confidence, with reliability. They need to be supported in how we accept as the criminal justice system their work product, while at the same time preserving your rights as an individual to fight against that. Because as we've all seen, how this initial police work happens, that's so important for the rest of the case. Minor issues or issues that otherwise people think are minor ain't.
Yeah, and specifically, the officer then starts putting names to people, and he's wrong. He's talking about, in one report, he says, Kaylee this and Kaylee that. Now we find out that it was Zaina and not Kaylee.
Yep.
So, understand something. People say, Joe, what's the big deal? It's a big deal. The defense hangs on these things, and you open yourself up to it, and then you understand you look like you don't know what you're doing, even if it's minor. But the defense is going to say, hey, how bad is this investigation if you can't even get the victims' names right?
Yeah, because I can embarrass most people on cross-examination. A good lawyer can pretty much do that. Doesn't matter the subject, because they're just pathways for questioning that set up the responder for, well, and this is going to not make you look awesome. And the real way to diffuse attacks from jerks like me is to be just completely open and vulnerable, because then I can't do anything. You got to admit everything, because in what you're talking about right now, standard officer, my style officer cross is to talk about how good the officer is at doing their job. Hey, Sarge, you went through post-training. You took these classes. You know how to write reports. You've been doing this for years. You've won the awards. You used all the appropriate law enforcement tools. You used your education. You've done this for years. Your job is to help the state discover evidence in order to convict people you formed a belief had violated the law. So you're already a judge, right? These are all questions that are not angry. I'm not picking a fight with an officer. The officer is going to answer them and be a good officer. Yep, I'm super well trained. I know how to write reports. I've taken those classes. I've testified a bunch of times. Now, the real trick now is, how do you take such confidence and skill and introduce to the jury the possibility that that officer might not have done everything well, could have done better, would have done better. And that's how you get into really upsetting the work of a police officer. So you did all this, and this is all in your report, and you used the words that you were trained to use. Are there any changes? Did you misphrase anything? Do you want to go back and amend or change before we get into this? I just want to make sure, before we talk in depth about what you recorded in the primary document that the state was going to rely on to prosecute someone and take away their rights, you did everything you were supposed to. And Sergeant Joe, yep, I'm Sarge. I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm really good at it. Man, I've arrested 150 people, whatever, and I get a 90. My work product is good. Okay, so officer, you did these investigations. You didn't talk to more people. You could have done this better. So you admit that you made an error with the names and identifications. Okay, did you ever go back and correct any of that? No. And you didn't correct it before today? No. Okay, so you based your report and admit already that you've made fundamental errors in recording the basic information.
Yep, that's it. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
People
And
don't
it's
realize
not, you're a
big
crappy cop. You're bad at your job. No. I've screwed up. You've screwed up. Judges screwed up. Everybody screws up.
Of course.
Own it. And a good defense attorney can go in there and upset the certainty of police work because the police officer used words, like you said, that could have been better. Now, the response to all this is, of course, the district attorney getting up and going, officer, you're not held to a perfect standard, right? It'd be ridiculous for you to spend all of this time using every single CSI tool in the universe on every single case, right? Yeah, you've got to steward the resources of the community, make sure that you're being used in the highest and best way as a law enforcement officer, since you're so precious. Yep. The state can absolutely rehabilitate most of them. They're not prepared to most of the time. But there's so much that you can do. And that word choice is freaking huge. Sorry.
Yeah, especially when you're bringing out alternative suspects and other people involved. I mean, and this is the kind of stuff where you say, I know people say, Joe, you're making a big deal out of this. You have a quadruple homicide here, guys. It is a big deal. And yet make sure you use the right words. Because when you read the report, you can open the door for there is more than one perpetrator in this room.
Yep.
One's hitting them with a heavy object and one's stabbing another group of people. And where's the heavy object? Now you waste your time as law enforcement searching for things that don't exist.
And you can establish that in front of juries so the state's always going to want to show a really professional, highly trained, accurate, reliable law enforcement investigatory process. That's why training matters. It's why routine matters. It's why we've established standards and practices in law enforcement that must be complied with, because guess what? Do you trust the doctor that doesn't wash their hands? That's basically, or it's an equivalent to an officer not using the tools that are right there. Body cams, best thing that ever happened to law enforcement, worst thing that ever happened to law enforcement. Video and digital media, so important. That's why this AI stuff gives me the thank God I'm not going to be a lawyer in 25, 30 years, because
oh my God, yeah, some of the stuff is already off the charts.
Holy smokes. This stuff is crazy. And remember, the defense isn't into proving stuff. It's just calling. No, you can't prove that. You can't prove that. It's not an affirmative duty to prove something else happened. No.
Right. Just place the doubt.
Yeah, it's, hey, the state, through all these great trained investigators and officers and professionals, can't put together a solid enough story for 12 people to believe that's what happened. If they can't put that show on, if they can't convince the audience that it was a crime, people get acquitted.
Yeah.
And that becomes so interesting when the ability of, hey, I can create digital evidence that literally shows anything. And is virtually indistinguishable from the cameras, the pictures that you took on your camera. What's real?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, and we learned a little bit more yesterday too about some of the, I guess, circumstantial evidence. One of the things I found interesting, I don't know if you heard about it, but they interviewed his Tinder match. Now, ladies who are watching this, ladies, we are watching this. So you match with this guy on Tinder, and he asks you the question, "What's the worst way to die?" And he like, holy red flag, that man, right? And she says, "Stabbing," and he answers with what, like a K-bar knife? And she's like, "I don't know what a K-bar knife is," and she said that she had to go and Google this stuff and research it to find out what it is.
Can't make this stuff up, y'all. Like,
Yeah,
literally, best cocktail party stories you will ever have. Go do law enforcement. Go do criminal justice for 6 months. You can't believe some of these brushes in life, because, as the world has proved, there are Kohbergers out there, and they're way less common than the social media universe would have you believe. This fear-based social media bugs me. The doom scrollers, and I have friends that are deeply involved, that every single post is about something scary, because fear is the number one way to affect people. I can induce you with money, or I can induce you with fear. What's more reactive? Fear. Nothing is more reactive than fear. And that's a tool that the state uses in its prosecutions. And it starts from the very, very beginning of the investigation. Because our society, we have law enforcement, we have laws because of fear. And that's very real. But yeah, the social media, the dating, the Kohberger, it's absolutely terrifying out there.
I mean, I would have asked if I was the investigator, and I said, "Why did you answer that question? You going on a date? What's the worst way to die? Check, please." Right? That's basically what you're talking about, and she's answering the questions.
Giant red flag, and you know that there's a couple of dudes out there being like, "Hey, she didn't say no. So I went to college with a guy. We all know this guy. We all do. He produces a lot. Like he really gets a little bit anxious, and he just talks a whole bunch. And he's very smart. He's very successful. And for a period, he was that guy that was, hey, I offend everybody equally. Yep, I tell all the terrible, I say all the outrageous things, but it's all for everybody. I don't have any prejudices, all that. And I'll tell you, he's a super nice, wonderful guy that I love and adore. I've known him now for decades. His way of meeting women, he thought that the volume of attempts would guarantee some results. So he just tried the volume route rather than the quality route. And he would use the most wacky, downright offensive, conversations, and figured, well, if I go talk to 100 girls, if one of them, this worked, that's enough of a winning percentage for me. And so I guarantee there are guys that were like, hey, if you ask the lady about stabbing, that's so weird and off-putting, that's going to make her be more intrigued by me. Let me add that to my tips and tricks of how to court the opposite part.
It wouldn't have been on my list. Let's put it that way.
But again, you're you, I'm me, they're them. There's lots of stuff that I don't understand, I don't get. I ain't gonna hold it against you because I'm very libertarian. You fly your flags the way whatever you want. Your rights end where my rights begin. You want to do it to yourself with consent, man, go crazy. There are people that would find that line of question probably more normal.
Well, you know what? For the people in the chat, ladies, if you were going on a date and this person said that to you, what would you have done? Just put that in the chat. I want to hear about that. The next thing that I thought was pretty interesting was that they had the text messages from professors at the college talking about an intervention with this Kohberger guy and about the misogyny and about these.
That's a high bar. That's a high bar before they're going to get involved at that level.
But there was a lot of complaints about this guy, and now we're finding out that the professors were even complaining about this guy.
And I think that may be one of the ancillary issues that gets some heat on this is, okay, educational institutions.
Yeah, what'd you do about it, right?
Yeah. Where does your lack of concern and action border on negligent and reckless? And that difference between negligent and reckless is really huge right now. In fact, we've got the Georgia case, just like the Michigan case where the parents gave the kid the gun or allowed the kid to get the gun. We've got one in Georgia where dad gave the documentedly, violent child a firearm, which then he used to go shoot up a school. When is it negligence and when is it reckless and when is it criminal and when is it civil? Those are the big questions that society faces when it comes to personal responsibility, crime and justice, law and order. When was Kohberger's behavior enough for a response from the university, but where does that response stop? Did they have an obligation to do more? If they did have an obligation to do more, what should be the appropriate consequence for failing to do more? And then you look into the ridiculousness of what do you do from an institution, organizational level to prevent this from happening? Because the professor at the time, I'm going to give all benefit of the doubt, said, hey, other professor, we got this one student. He's a little bit of a nutter. Okay. We should talk about him. All right. What's our opinion? Well, he's a student. He said this, he did that, he did that. All right. What are we going to do as a group of teachers or professors? Well, are we going to get to the level where we're going to kick somebody out of the program? Man, that's a big consequence. That's big. Are we going to bring him in for a discussion? Well, that sounds really reasonable, but then what's the impact on that student? Doesn't that student have, some rights? Isn't that student due some consideration? What if he's just a weirdo, but completely harmless? Does that deserve investigation? And if it does deserve investigation, how should that investigation happen? And then what should the result of it? Are we going to take all socially awkward people and tag them with that person may be negligent or reckless, and there may be harm that comes from them, so we put them on this list of people that might be someone that something could happen to in the future because this horrible thing happened elsewhere that could happen. You see where we're going with this?
Yeah, no. I think the conversation is happening on college campuses, though.
Yeah,
I think it is.
It has to. It has to. College campuses are. So I went to college from 1994 to 1998 at a small, pretentious, expensive, prestigious liberal arts university in New England. It was glorious. It's where you took middle up and upper class kids for 4 years and put them in a bubble for them to make all of the dumbest mistakes of young adulthood possible on a college campus where they couldn't be thrown in prison forever. And then after 4 years, we give them a degree and say, go, don't screw up. Similar to the military. Military is great for 18 to 22-year-olds because you can only do so much dumb stuff in basic in your first 4 years. Yeah, it's not going to protect you fully, but you get those railings around you. And what happens in those years, how you interact with the system. And I'm glad I was not held to the highest levels of accountability for the decisions I made when I was 18 to 22. Because guess what? I was in the room with the dope. I tell people this all the time. I had a really good friend in college who was a very well-regarded, successful public employee who has received many accolades for incredible public service over 30 years. Was the biggest weed dealer you ever wanted to think about in the late 90s. There was a lot of weed that went through there. Decades. Life in prison amounts of weed. Makes me think about Law and Order and the drug universe all the time because I went to college with a bunch of people when weed was 100% illegal that all of us would have gone to prison. Then we get into other drugs that were common in the late 90s, where if I had been picked up, implicated, we were all guilty. You carried drugs, you were going to the club. There's so many opportunities for a lot. You look at the class differences of what of these college kids versus not college kids. What if it's a state college versus a prestigious college? There's lots of issues that come up in some of these analyses that if you go by Law and Order, those people's lives would have been ruined for stuff that most college kids don't pay 1 second of attention to.
Yeah.
And that fundamental unfairness is part of the class divisions that run America. My young, urban, primarily men who grow up and turn 17 or 18 and are released on their community without enough support, guidance, planning, when they step out of line, they go to jail. That jail follows them for the rest of their life. That's not what happens to middle-class kids. That's not what happens to upper-class kids. And that's a big fairness issue for Law and Order nationally and internationally.
Yeah, no. I want to get into the impact statements. So let's talk about them. I mean, one thing listen, they were a little rougher than I thought they were going to be.
What do you mean by rougher? Aggressive or unpolished?
I guess right, polished is a much better adjective in respect to some of the things. I mean, talking about, you got A's and B's in class and you're going to get the big D's in prison, that kind of stuff. Entertainment value, and I can understand they're very upset. And folks, don't get me wrong. This guy deserves everything he gets in regards to that, and he was, but there is some decorum in the courtroom that you want to see, whatever. But the one thing I did like was when the father, Gonsalves, he turned the podium right to him, and I thought that was a very good statement in that respect.
Powerful words and actions combined. And
Olivia's.
Notice just from a perspective presentation, moving the podium, recentering the whole room, changing the perspective, the emotional impact of that, a silent, short, easy, one of the more powerful moments, like you just highlighted.
Yeah.
Everybody got chills. That's
No,
how
I
you
think,
move a needle.
yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly how many people caught that move, but I thought that was a really powerful
Oh,
move.
I don't know. I imagine it was somewhat planned. Very powerful, well presented. Um, really good way to tie the emotion of your listener. Um,
Yeah,
the
I mean, listen, these
speaker
people have
has,
gone through so much.
oh God, unbelievable. Well, what do you think? Do you think that the victim, who do you think the victim impact, or let me change that. What effect, if any, do you believe the victim impact statements have on the process, on everything?
I like impact statements. I think they should be done in every situation. I think that it's, I've been in the courtroom when this happened, and they are very powerful. Uh, there's the first time I've heard them like that, though. I've never really seen anybody. I mean, that they might say, listen, you can go to hell and this and that and everything. I get it. Listen, the anger, your 20-year-old daughter, your 22-year-old son, gone. I couldn't imagine. And the guy who's I forget, the stepfather says, if I could be in the woods with you for a few minutes, you know, we've heard that kind of stuff. I mean, we know that, but I guess well, they were impactful. That's for sure,
Yeah.
because we're talking about them.
And here's my thing with the impact statements. I do not believe they should have an outsized impact on the judge's job, even though the judge should absolutely listen to and consider them. I don't believe they dealt one lick with the result in Kohberger, because guess what? He was getting quad locked and did it for, and no one was going to have a problem with the judge swinging hard. And really, even in a more typical case, victim impact is important, but it's not shared with the court through the victim impact statement. It's generally during plea negotiations, during trial, something like that, where the court's going to have heard from the victim through the work of the prosecution and the results of the prosecution, because victims get to impact prosecution. But let's just be very plain here. The prosecutor calls the ball. The victims do not control the process. The victims can't stop the process necessarily. It's the prosecutor's job. That's why we elect them and pay them. Buck stops with them. So I really need a court to respect the value of a victim impact statement from family, not for as much of how it's going to impact the actual sentence, but for the benefits of the families and the victims and the people left behind. The victim impact statements are a necessary and important part of the healing and the closure process that is part of criminal justice and prosecution. Part of your job as a prosecutor is to assist the victims and families deal with what you're dealing with professionally on a personal basis. And that's a really important, sorry about that, Kitty. That's a really important thing to do. Well, that was interesting. So, I really, the value of those victim impact statements really is on the community and the individual victims more than anybody else. I give a pass to basically anybody who is a true victim in saying whatever they want during a very emotional moment. Having watched a lot of these, jokes typically don't work. Anger is understandable. The wish for vengeance, this is where the wish for vengeance is appropriate, because there's a reason we have a separation between law and order and crime and justice and the actual victims, because if the actual victims were in charge, everybody would get the death penalty. If you hurt my person, I should not have an outsized impact over what society does to you. And that, I think, is something important to really focus in on with the discussion of whether the death penalty was wrongfully taken off the table, whether the victims' families were listened to enough by the prosecution and the system. I do not like, sorry, let me say this very specifically. I like all kinds of humor, including very inappropriate humor. My life is very inappropriate in a lot of sectors because that's what I do. And I get it. I try not to take umbrage. I try not to get overly offended. I try to give everybody grace because Lord knows I've needed it and said all kinds of ridiculous things that unfortunately were offensive to others without my intent. Not a big fan of the prison rape stuff because I've spoken to a lot of rape victims. I get it. There's a strong wish for some horrific experiences to be experienced by Mr. Kohberger. If I was a family man, there'd be no end to it. Prison rape is beyond horrifying when you get down to it. But obviously you get a pass from me morally and ethically considering what's going on that day. But I don't think that the victim impact statements really have an impact on the judge in assessing sentence. But it's very important and healthy for the community to see and hear these words as well as the victims' families.
Yep. I want to welcome Marie to the membership. Thank you very much, Marie. Well, there is some truth to that because they actually had on, I think it was News Nation, they had excerpts from inmates at the Latah County Jail were already talking about Kohberger back then. And they were getting, one guy said he was very smart, but he's freaking annoying. He's always washing his hands. He's always doing, he's always washing his hands and he's just annoying. And, he's up all night. The guy said he's up all night and then he sleeps during the day. So, yeah. And listen, the new inmates already know who he is. And, it is he's going to be living in protective.
Yeah. He's going to have a challenging sentence to live through. And that's something that I know we briefly talk about, but it's something folks don't necessarily understand. Once you are in the Department of Corrections system, there's a whole new set of rules for life. And what was down is up is down. Who you think is in charge isn't necessarily. There are people that you don't think have influence that have a lot of influence because each one of these facilities is its own unique habitat and ecosystem. Most people don't know this. Not the only Schiffer involved in crime and law and order. My brother has spent 30 years in the very serious world of sex offenses and is the director of the Minnesota Sex Offender Program and knows more about sex offenders in ways that I never want to. There's some stuff that happens in the prison system that is counterintuitive and interesting, where of the people that God has punished the most, being in prison and then segregated because of your personality, behavior, and charges, even within that frightening subset, it's something. You do not want to be in prison for a long time as a sex offender without a lot of people supporting you because it's beyond lonely and downright dangerous. I worked briefly with a gentleman who was wrongfully convicted. Eventually he got out and compensated, blah, 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 where he was in a maximum security prison. And we were talking to him about how that was. And one of the discoveries made was that he had about 80%, 90% of his time was in segregation, ADSEG. How do you get to ADSEG, also known as protective custody or the whole or all kinds of different things? Well, you wouldn't want to go there voluntarily, would you? It's 24-hour a day lockdown. You get your food through a slot. You get 2 showers a week. You might get half an hour outside once a week. Like, it's bad for you. There are limits on it because of what it does to your brain. Problem is, this guy was abused so much in general population that, as awful as ADSEG was, it was better than general population because he was victimized by his compatriots who are, let's just be clear, all criminals in the most horrible way possible. And he was raped upon rape upon rape. No one could stop it. They didn't have the facility. They didn't have the funds. They didn't have the support. The sheriff said, sorry, we're doing better. We'll try to protect you. Jump back into the pool. And as awful as everything else that this guy had dealt with, because it was truly awful. It's actually a good story about how the death penalty was inappropriately used to coerce a co-defendant to plea. Basically, the story being, hey, if you don't accept responsibility for this, we're going to put a needle in your body. That's an inappropriate shifting of things. This guy got out, and the abuse that he had wrongfully endured really saps the humor from the prison rape, because it was beyond horrific. And he literally would rather be an ADSEG than getting raped every day.
Yep. Just want to give a quick shout out to Carmel. Thank you very much for that super sticker. That hour flew by, Josh, but I wanted to.
There's more.
Yeah. Is what?
We can totally do this more. Oh. Yeah, I love talking with you. This is a blast.
Right.
We can get a couple more. Make it a regular old hoedown.
Sure. I was going to say, I named the title of this Requiem for Justice. We didn't get into the Karen Reed stuff, but
we didn't even touch the ridiculousness.
We'll have to do another show soon, and we'll cover that.
Let's do that. Let's get that planned. Let's get some specific questions from audience that maybe haven't been answered by other people, haven't been addressed, something that's sticking out in their brains, because no one's happier that Karen Reed has done than me. I was so sick of multiple facets of it. It was unbelievable. But there was a lot we got out of that as a true crime community, as citizens of the United States, as practitioners, as people who are just really interested in law and order.
Some good learning stuff, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Lots of learning opportunities in there.
Well, you know what we could do is, if everyone goes to my website on the podcast page, I believe it is, there's you can actually leave a voicemail. And you can leave a voicemail for me and Josh, and we'll play those live on a future roll call, and we'll try to answer those questions about the Karen Reed or Bryan Kohberger, whatever you'd like, and we'll answer them live on the air.
I would absolutely love that, man. That would be fantastic.
Good. Yeah, I was gonna say, so I named it Requiem for Justice, but that was actually an ode to my favorite author, Rod Serling, who wrote, Requiem for a Heavyweight. Which was not a Twilight Zone episode, everybody. A lot of people think it's Twilight Zone, but it wasn't. But that was the reason. Because I know Bloom, who wrote the book, used Requiem for something or else. And they thought
there's Requiem for a lot.
But
our justice community is really exciting to watch right now, because there are now fundamental questions that stem to this politics and the federal stuff and all, that is filtering down into our state system. It is a fascinating era to be watching and involved with how our communities run. And we'll see what rolls out of some of these big hot things. The Diddy stuff. Cannot wait to talk more about the Diddy stuff.
Rex Sherman list.
Kohberger,
that's going to be huge.
Yeah, the Kohberger post-mortem of the prosecution. There's going to be a lot that gets picked apart there. Richard Allen continues to be fascinating to me. I know that's not the hottest one for people, but I feel that there was a substantial set of issues with his prosecution that were never adequately resolved. We've now got one of the Menendez brothers is so ill, they took him out of the prison. Eric and Lyle Menendez, of course, the famous guys from California, the brutal murder of their father. He is now in the hospital, and they're saying that a compassionate release may free him before they get to the resentencing and things like that. That's a fascinating issue. We have some more prosecutions in Fulton County, and one that didn't get a lot of play. We all watched Young Thug last year, and everybody says, oh, you can't do RICO. RICO's not going to. Well, they just did one against a similarly situated P person in Fulton County, and he got the whole bat. Him, mom, other people, they got life. Full home run by the state on a complicated RICO case.
And we also got Scott Peterson trying to get.
Yep. And
trying to get out again.
Lisk is going to come back. The Gilgo. We got that coming. There's a lot going out there, Lorna. And we're dealing with how our court system fundamentally interacts with the individuals, and whether that's good, whether that's bad, whether it can deal with some improvement. The politics of the Department of Justice right now, and a lot of stuff that we can never discuss that I'd love to on kind of the big shows, because they will very specifically stay out of hot button political issues, which I absolutely understand. I'd love to talk about the Department of Justice and what's going on in New Jersey, where you have the court system come out and tell the Department of Justice that the person that they don't like dealing with the appointed U.S. attorney, Miss Haba. The court said, we're not going to deal with Miss Haba. We're going to deal with Miss Haba's top lieutenant because we have problems with Miss Haba. Well, that's kind of interesting in the first place. And the court sidelines Miss Haba and starts dealing with her first deputy. And the U.S. Department of Justice's response was, well, hey, court, if you're only going to deal with that person, watch this, and disappeared that person, fired.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Lifetime federal man, that if you're a lawyer, think about the chill that puts on. Getting a prosecutor job in the Department of Justice, that's the big leagues. No one's doing that as just a short-term hop in their career. This is serious stuff that reverberates for decades. The brain drain and the brain investment in these long-form, highly important jobs, that upsets the apple cart. Those lawyers generally, those prosecutors generally became some of our judges and local business leaders because of the skills and experience that they've developed.
This has been fascinating, Josh. It's always great to talk to you. But yeah, we're going to be doing this again. So everybody, go to my website. It's on there, josephjacqueline.com, and you can leave a voicemail message, and Josh and I will answer them at a future show.
Absolutely.
Josh, you have a great day.
You too. Follow me on Twitter. That's really my only social media that I do now is @LawyerSchiff, because it was all just too much elsewhere.
And we got that in the show notes too. So if you missed that, you can go to the show notes and get a hold of it. All right, Josh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Everybody have a great day.